Good evening. I'm going to test the sound. It's a little loud. Online participants, can you indicate if you can hear us? Vice Chair Thompson, I see a thumbs up. Thank you so much. We're going to get going here as soon as my colleagues are seated and ready to go. Okay, welcome everyone. Going to call us to order. This is the May 28th, 2024 City of Portland Planning Commission meeting. I'm the chair, Mary Rain O'Mara. I'm joined here in person by Commissioner Lang, Commissioner Routh, Commissioner Spivak, Commissioner Alexander, Vice Chair Pouncil. Online we have Vice Chair Thompson. And, sorry, Patricia. Okay. And any items of interest from commissioners as we get started here this evening? Okay, seeing none, we will proceed to our first item of business, which is a briefing. I believe, Patricia, you're going to lead us through this on the Planning Commission's advising role.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair O'Mara. Appreciate it. Patricia Diefendorfer, for the record, Chief Planner, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So I do have a brief presentation, and this is, as you mentioned, about the advise role of the Planning Commission. This is a conversation that we started at a retreat back in March. And we're bringing it here today to kind of close the loop and at least a part of that conversation because it is kind of relevant to the item that the commission is going to be getting a briefing on later today. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen and get right into it. I just have a relatively few slides and then I'll have some opportunity for us to do any questions and answers, have a quick discussion, and then hopefully we can move on to the main item of the agenda. So I am going to share screen here momentarily. Okay. Everyone can see on the screens. I don't see them coming up on the, there we go. There's always just this little bit of delay I've noticed with the PowerPoint starting up. Okay, very well. So again, thank you for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation here at Commission this evening. This is about the advising role. So the purpose of today's meeting is to kind of continue to have the discussion that we had about defining this advising role and defining or developing an approach to how the commission will inform and participate on projects in this advising role. So just as a reminder for you and also for others who may be watching, these are the stated powers and duties per the zoning code that are the authorities given to the Planning Commission. As you can see, a lot of the items that the Planning Commission sees on its agendas pertain to the first power and duty, which is the duty of holding hearings and making a recommendation to the City Council on formal legislative items. Then there is this duty related to advising City Council and staff on plans and policies regarding a variety of issues that are, issues of citywide interest. And so this is the power that we've been trying to define a little bit more and define and describe what the role of the commission is in these types of matters, because they are not the conventional legislative role that the commission has. And so we started to talk about when we would sort of invoke this role, if you may recall, and just generally how do we define this role. So this applies to topics that may be of interest to the Planning Commission that are not legislative. So they're not changing policy or regulations, but they still have they're still matters of importance that relate to city planning and land use. Topics that are the purview of this commission. They're items that are not considered a land use decision, so therefore they don't require public notification, and they are not appealable. They also typically would pertain to items that the city council, the action that the city council is taking is one in which they're taking a resolution. They're adopting a resolution rather than an ordinance. And so I think the approach that we defined a little bit that we're confirming here is shown here in the red. The Planning Commission's purview in these projects really is to determine if the policy or the project is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And that would be because the Planning Commission is the keeper, so to speak, of the comprehensive plan, right? And if you may recall in past presentations where we've talked about items that are kind of, the legislative making the policies and the new regulations, and then the things that take place subsequently that implement those policies and regulatory changes. And they may involve other planning-related policies of citywide interest on a case-by-case basis. So they could vary in terms of what these topics might be. Again, this should look familiar to you from the retreat. We talked about, a suggested approach, and I want to direct our attention to the column on the right, which really is kind of the modifications that we discussed to the approach that I think that is what we will sort of use in this process for the housing production strategy that we're talking about, if we have agreement on that. But so basically, what we discussed was that the Planning Commission would hear a briefing, that we would create an opportunity for public comment so that the Planning Commission could hear directly from the public about these topics. We also, the approach would involve the Planning Commission providing, it would create an opportunity for the Planning Commission to provide input. And that input does not have to represent a consensus view amongst the planning commissioners. So there may be, they may vary among the different members, and they may, that input may reflect different points of view. No vote would be taken on these items, again, because they are not, an item that is part of the formal legislative process, and it's not changing policy or regulation. So no vote would be taken. Staff may make modifications based on commissioner comments. Also, I think, and this is the updated based on the input that we received from you all from the retreat, is that the commissioner feedback would be included in any summaries of public comment that would be prepared as part of the recommended draft that would go to council. And also the commission would have the option, if they wish to exercise that option, of writing a letter to city council. And the focus of that letter would be whether the project would be not so much about whether there's support or not for the project, but rather whether the project is consistent with the comprehensive plan, or what would be necessary to make the project consistent with the comprehensive plan. So the reason this is germane to today, and why we wanted to bring this topic up today, was to say that we have one of these items before us. Our primary item on this agenda is the housing production strategy. This is, again, one of those documents where it is not, policy setting. It is more implementing policy. It fits within the advise role in the sense that the Planning Commission is, of course, interested in housing topics generally and has expressed interest specifically about the housing production strategy. It is notable, and this is a unique situation, but it is notable that in this case, there actually is state statute that expressly says that the housing production strategy is not a land use decision. And so that's also another important factor in this particular case, and why it lends itself to this this arena of the advisory role that Planning Commission has, because in fact the City Council will adopt this housing production strategy by resolution. And so I think that largely we wanted to just get affirmation from the Planning Commission that that we have agreement on this approach. I think that we understand that there's more discussion to be had about the advisory role as it pertains specifically to the approach we will take with significant transportation projects. That's another arena specifically that I think we need to delve more into. So we will do that at a future retreat, which we will be talking to you about dates on that, not here, but in soon. And also, we wanted to let you know that next steps on this also do include incorporating this approach into the best practices operating procedures document that we have also been working together to develop in our retreats and our conversations. So I'm going to stop there and create see if there are any questions, if there are any comments, see where we are with this right now, so that we can move on to our next agenda item. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for that overview. I do have a question since essentially we're testing this on the housing production strategy, and this is Mary Rayno Mara for the record. This item will come back before us on June 11th, I believe. And so I take it that at that meeting, we will discuss whether or not the Planning Commission wants to submit a letter to City Council. Is that sort of the process you have in mind in terms of, since it's not legislative, it's not required, but we will need to have some discussion about whether or not that's desired?
Yes, I think what we just created the June 11th meeting is the opportunity, because today you're going to have, it's pretty much going to be a full meeting with the briefing itself and with the public comment for the testimony, the testifiers that are signed up. So we wanted to create an opportunity at the next meeting to have the discussion, both for you to give feedback to staff on the strategies itself, the strategy document and the strategies themselves. And then also at that time, you can have a conversation about whether the commission would like to write a letter to the City Council about consistency with the comprehensive plan. Yes.
Thank you. Any additional questions from fellow commissioners? Okay, thank you again. So moving on to the main agenda item for tonight, which is the housing production strategy. This will be a briefing and an opportunity for public comment. So welcome Tom Armstrong and Ariel Kane. As they're getting settled, do any commissioners have disclosures to make relevant to this agenda item? Okay, thank you and welcome Tom and Ariel.
Yeah, there we go. All right, good evening, commissioners. I'm Tom Armstrong. I'm a supervising planner at BPS, and I lead our housing and economic policy team, and which has been the lead team for the housing needs analysis and now the follow-up for the housing production strategy. And with me tonight, no?
Okay. Oh, thank you. Ariel Kane, an economic planner, also supporting the housing production strategy. Thank you.
All right. As Patricia explained, we have a briefing here for you tonight, and then followed by public comment, and then we can have a discussion about next steps. Next slide, please. And as was just discussed, we'll be back on June 11th for further discussion. So I think tonight, after you hear the briefing and the public comment, if there are any outstanding questions you have, requests for more information on particular topics, we're happy to bring that back to support the June 11th discussion. Next slide. So tonight, as part of our briefing, we will provide you just some context about what's in the comprehensive plan about housing. We'll have a recap or a reminder about what's in the housing needs analysis and a few extra analyses that we've done as part of the housing production strategy. We'll get into the strategy itself. And the broad range of strategies that we have in there. And then finally, just sort of a summary of the public engagement that we've been doing over the last 3 to 4 months and what we've heard from the community and how that is influencing the strategies going forward. And then we'll open it up for public comment. So just a reminder of where this production strategy sits in the scheme of things. As you know, Patricia explained, this is a new thing being required by the state as part of sort of the enhanced or increased requirements on cities around planning for housing. Last year, what you saw and what council adopted last December was the buildable lands inventory and the housing needs analysis. Those are supporting what we call supporting documents to the comprehensive plan. They were adopted by ordinance. They are a land use decision. The housing production strategy is really designed by the state to be a 5-year action plan. What additional actions are cities going to take to support the production of housing? It's part of this, requirement to hold cities more accountable about the amount and types of housing that are being produced within the cities. And so this really sits in support of, but outside of the land use documents. And I like to think of it as something akin to the climate action plan, which really laid out a series of steps. It also, for those that have you tracked this long, going back to the Portland plan, a big component of the Portland plan was a bunch of actions that city bureaus were going to take to implement those plans. And so this really is more of an action plan document than a regulatory document, if you will. Next slide, please. So in just transitioning, pivoting to what's in the comprehensive plan, Chapter 5 is focused on our housing goals and policies. Next slide. And we really, from a high level, citywide level, we start with the urban design framework, our growth management pattern of centers and corridors, and really focused on complete neighborhoods and transit-oriented, reducing reliance on automobiles. And you'll see later in the briefing on how we're doing this in terms of that either future growth pattern or where we have room to grow in the city. I think there's another couple of guiding principles, overarching guiding principles that really, that you'll see incorporated into both the goals and policies as well as the strategies. Again, increasing access to complete neighborhoods, making sure people have access to a wide range of community amenities, whether that's parks or transit access or grocery stores. That is a key theme running throughout these strategies, as well as equity and reducing disparities, increasing housing choice, especially in terms of affordability and in terms of our lower income households. And then finally, what we've added in is an analysis of our buildable land inventory around with a lens on resilience, looking at parts of the city that are susceptible to natural hazards, susceptible to climate change, and sort of how this all sort of fits in what I like to call, are we prepared to grow, expected to grow in right places, in complete neighborhoods, close to transit? Or are we, what is our risk in terms of the wrong place, wildfire hazards or urban heat islands and that sort of thing, floodplains. So we've added some analysis of that. Again, when you look at Chapter 5 of the comprehensive plan and the range of goals and policies in there, you see those themes being carried through. The sort of first two main bodies of goals and policies around diversity and access is really about supporting the production of a wide range of housing types and locations to really create that housing choice in Portland. Goal 5C around healthy, connected city, that's really the direction around complete neighborhoods and increasing access to opportunity. We have a whole suite of policies around affordable housing, just as we have a whole suite of strategies around supporting the production of affordable housing. And then finally, we have a suite of policies around what we call high performance housing, and you'll see that carried over into the strategies in terms of things like low carbon buildings and innovative housing with like mass timber and that sort of those sort of approaches. All right, I'm going to turn things over to Ariel, who will give you a recap of what was in the housing needs analysis.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So I will be brief. These are numbers that you all saw before when you recommended the City Council adopt the 2045 Housing Needs Analysis, which was adopted in December 2023. But it is helpful to understand where we're going with the housing production strategy and what we're really planning for. So the 2045 Housing Needs Analysis, in our forecast, we started with the 2019 Regional Distributive Forecast that the state requires us to use for Metro, estimating a low estimate of 97,000 new housing units needed over the next 20 years. We built onto that methodology and added in underproduction, as well as second home or vacation home loss, and also accounting for our currently houseless households, building out that sort of top end, building out that top end of the forecast being about 120,000 new units needed over the next 20 years. That results in a need to develop about 5,000 to 6,000 units every year over the next 20 years, which is it's a stretch goal for Portland. So we didn't just look at net new housing units. We also needed to look at for whom is it affordable. So as this chart shows, we expect over the next 20 years, those 120,000 units will need to be affordable at a range of different levels. So we need moderate income housing as well as high income housing. But notable here is that need for that 53% of those 120,000 units needing to be affordable at that 0 to 80% AMI range. That's about 53% of all of our new units needing to be affordable to our most low-income households. We also looked at different housing considerations, so household composition, as well as different needs within our households. So as I mentioned, we're looking at housing our currently houseless households, housing that can range for accommodating those households, but might include needing to provide permanent supportive housing. We also have households with members who have disabilities, which means some of our housing units need to be accounting for accessibility and universal design. We know we have children in our communities, so we need to have family-sized units, not only studios and one-bedrooms, but also these larger family-sized units. And then lastly, we also looked at our forecast in terms of we are becoming an aging population, not just here in Portland, but around the US. And so we need to be able to house appropriately our older adults, so retrofits, but also creating units that are accessible for aging in place or aging in community. There's a lot of intersectionality between these numbers. They're just broken out for an easy way to look at them. So we know we have multi-generational households. We know we have households who have children with disabilities. So this is just one way of looking at our different housing needs over the next 20 years. So those slides really touch on the demand, what we expect in terms of our need. The H&A, in the H&A process, we're also asked by the state to look at our buildable lands inventory and also understand, do we have enough housing capacity for the units that we expect to need over the next 20 years? The short answer was yes, we do. Our buildable lands inventory is based on our current zoned capacity, so what our current zoning says is possible, as well as our expected market factors in terms of what's feasible to develop right now. So on the right-hand side is that residential capacity from the buildable lands inventory. The tall pink, tall darker spikes indicate an increased density for housing units in per acre, where shallower, lighter pink shows that there's still some capacity for development, but it's not as concentrated. So there's a lot of capacity concentrated in our central city, as well as along our centers and corridors to the north and to the east, which aligns with the map on the left, which Tom showed you previously, our urban design framework, where we want to be promoting and supporting growth in order to meet the goals of our comprehensive plan. So these two maps align well, which means that we have the opportunity in the housing production strategy to continue to look at where growth is possible and encourage growth in our centers and corridors. So the next couple of slides are a little bit new. As Tom mentioned, we opted to do additional analysis to supplement both the fair housing analysis that we're required to do for the HPS, but also the contextualized housing needs, most of which comes from the housing needs analysis. So this analysis is largely just looking at are we growing and do we have the opportunity to grow where we want to grow, and how growth pressures might impact different areas, as well as where is there additional opportunity to increase housing opportunity. So I'll talk about these top four, but the memo that we provided Planning Commission and the public includes 3 other analyses: the complete neighborhoods, the low carbon areas, as well as the hazard risks. I'll start by talking about the centers and corridors. So this is related to the urban design framework and where we're trying to plan for growth in the comprehensive plan. It basically shows our new demand, our forecasted demand, as well as our capacity is where we want it to be as it relates to meeting those comprehensive plan goals. Of note here also, we did look at the distribution of regulated affordable housing across the city, and in each of these analyses, we look at existing population as well as existing households and those affordable housing units. So 90% of our affordable housing units have been developed within a quarter mile of centers and corridors, which is a net good. This is the economic vulnerability risk map. You've seen a version of this map before. We've updated it for the housing production strategy to use 2022 data. So I believe the last map was updated for 2019. So economically vulnerable areas have higher concentrations of cost burden renters, are communities of color, lower income households, and households that have a lower level of degree attainment. So here you can see that those areas are concentrated to the east, as well as in our central city, and to the north in St. John's, as well as some other smaller pockets throughout the city. When you look at this map and you look at this table, you can see that there's a proportional share of our households as well as our new demand and capacity. So we would expect that any new growth here would not necessarily overburden or create extreme pressures on the populations that already exist. We're not overestimating or seeing, you're not going to see a 90% growth of demand or capacity in these areas. So that is also considered a good thing in terms of being able to plan more carefully about the housing that is developed in these areas. This analysis is a new analysis, but it is racially concentrated areas of affluence and racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. This analysis is modeled off of work that's coming out of California and from HUD to have a greater understanding of racialized economic segregation within different geographies. So here, racially concentrated areas of affluence, these areas show us that there are more white households, more affluent households than the region concentrated in these areas. And on the other side, that we see higher shares of communities of color and lower income households concentrated in the blue areas on this map. So when we look at this, we see that in the racially concentrated areas of poverty, that the new demand and capacity is proportionate to households and populations that are already living in these areas. But when we look at the areas of affluence, we're seeing that not only is there less affordable housing developed in these areas, but there's been less growth in these communities over the last 20 years. And so we're forecasting that the demand, because our demand forecast, if you might remember, is based on if the next 20 years of growth looked like the last 20 years of growth. So we would see less than 3% or around 3% of our new demand in these areas if trends continued. We also see a lower amount of capacity available in these areas as well. So what that shows us is that there's still opportunity to increase housing access and opportunity in these areas, and also break up economic segregation as well. And then the last bit of data I have for you all today is looking at Portland Housing Bureau's opportunity areas. This is similar to our analysis of the complete neighborhoods that BPS uses. It looks at, on a score 1 to 5, 5 being the highest area of opportunity, access to education, to services, to healthy and active amenities for a healthy and active lifestyle. So we are seeing that over the last 20 years, Portland Housing Bureau has been using this as part of their investment framework, and that most of our regulated affordable housing is already developed in high opportunity areas. We also see that we have a higher share of new demand and capacity for growth in these areas as well, which, as with the other areas, provides us with additional opportunity in the housing production strategy to really look at how we can increase housing and density in these areas. With that, I will pass back to Tom to talk about the housing production strategy.
All right, thank you. Let's go to the next slide. So, as I was talking about earlier, a strategy is an action item. It's a future action that the city will take. The state lays out some requirements that they want to see, especially around what part of the housing spectrum do we think this action will affect? Is it for renters or owners? Is it for lower income households, or just anyone, the market in general? And most importantly is the last one, the time frame. Like, when do we expect to get to it over the next 5 years? And we'll do this all again 6 years from now with a new HNA and a new housing production strategy. So this is a sort of an ongoing cycle, but that time frame, it really is about the priorities and the strategies in terms of what are we going to work on next, or when do we expect to address these issues. So we have 8 broad categories that the strategies are organized under. The first one being promoting more affordable housing in that lower income category. We have a couple of bundles of strategies around increasing home ownership and increasing access to opportunity. The category D, reducing barriers, is all about our permitting process and streamlining the permitting process. We added a category around stabilization or anti-displacement to really, we felt it was a challenge to go out and talk to the community and talk about housing without recognizing what can we do sort of in the short term for our current households that are under pressure. And then we, again, have a couple of bundles of strategies around the quality of housing, the type of housing we're getting, especially around age-friendly housing and lower emission housing. And then the last category, again, is something that we added to the mix that really recognizes that the city can't do this alone, that we're going to need help from the state and from the federal level. And so it begins to build a legislative agenda that helps identify, when it comes to housing, what kinds of issues we want to advocate for in terms of assistance from the state and federal level. Now, I'm going to spend just a little time giving you an overview of each of those categories. So starting with back at the top with promoting affordable housing, the first strategy here has to do with the inclusionary housing review that we just completed last year. And you know, as part of that, the area that is eligible for full tax abatement buildings and looking at doing the analysis to make sure our bundle of incentives match the cost of compliance. And as part of that, you know, we recognize the need to do this periodic review to really go back to the county, who also has to sign off on the tax abatement program. And so we included that as part of our sort of 3-year progress report on this strategy of repeating that review of the inclusionary housing program. You'll see a handful of strategies around new revenue sources. We're sort of coming at the end of a life cycle of many of our urban renewal areas. We are also quickly spending out both the city affordable housing bond as well as the metro bond. And so we need to really look at what are the next sources of revenue to continue that investment in affordable housing. Number 6 is really a repeat of a project that we did a few years ago called Expanding Opportunities for Affordable Housing, where we partnered with a number of institutions to rezone properties to increase the housing capacity for housing for affordable housing. And so we're looking at launching later this year another project to identify sites with our community partners and sort of making sure that the zoning fits sort of their development plans. And then some other policies around how to further elevate fair housing into our city code and around our land banking practice that builds on the public land inventory that we did last year. In terms of home ownership, we have both a mix of strategies that are both sort of code permitting process as well as funding and programs to support home ownership in terms of financial incentives. Next one, please. I think in terms of access to opportunities, we had 2 main studies and programs, both of which we're getting underway this year in terms of you know, we have grants from the state to support the early work on looking at the infrastructure capacity in our inner centers and corridors, to look at future upzonings, and as well as looking at our system of zoning bonuses and incentives that are sort of outside the central city and how that's working. I think this is an area where we heard a lot of, as Ariel will explain, we heard a lot of comments on, and we're looking at adding a couple of additional strategies, one specifically to address housing opportunity in the central city, and another along 82nd Avenue and related to the transit investment that's going on along there. Next one. So again, the reducing barriers to development is really around implementing the new Portland Permitting and Development Bureau, and following it. You know, just because we've sort of reorganized and put that in place, there's a lot of other actions that need to continue that implementation. I think this is also the bundle of strategies where we begin to look at you know, other costs that are related to city requirements, especially when it comes to infrastructure. And that's where in numbers 4 and 5 are really looking at what can the city do to shift that cost burden sort of from the development itself to larger city programs. I think we saw in the last legislative session where we got state money to support the infrastructure development for the Broadway Corridor project and for the OMSI project and sort of beginning to to do more programmatic infrastructure investments directly related to housing production. In terms of stabilization, there's a few here. I think this is one that's important, and you will see in one of the memos we provided around existing programs that we're doing a lot in terms of the city, in terms of supporting stabilization. And I think this is when we were out in the community, this is one of the questions that we had. The housing production strategy doesn't need to be all about new programs. If we have existing programs that are working, we should, double down our investment into those programs. And I think this is one of those categories where when you look at the existing as well as what we could do in the future, there's a lot there. The next one, please. So again, we have a lot, we've done a lot of work in the past around age and disability-friendly housing, accessible housing, visitable housing. We have both actions that the city can do in terms of regulatory reform, or as you see as sort of an educational technical assistant opportunity for folks. How can they improve access to their existing household to make it more age-friendly, and so to better support folks in aging in place. You'll also see this pop up in the advocacy agenda because a lot of this is related to the state building code, and we as a city only have limited powers when it comes to building code issues.
Commissioner Routh, for the record, educating, is that residential owners? Is that
Yeah,
developers? Who is that?
It's educating owners. It could be all of the above, but it really is aimed at educating owners, and it could be, doing what we call code memos that, here's what you need to do to get a permit to put a ramp to your front door, or to make changes to your bathroom to make it more accessible, and just help owners and developers, builders understand a little bit more about how easy or how hard it could be in terms of adding those features to your existing home or as you plan out a new home. Again, when it comes to, let's go to the next one, sort of more innovative and climate friendly. We know that we've seen a lot of work on mass timber and modular construction, and that's a way of reducing carbon emissions with new construction. We also, the adaptive reuse category, especially when it comes to Central City and looking at how we can support the commercial to residential conversions. That'll be an important component moving forward that we want to support and really see what we can do there in terms of creating new housing. And then finally, we have a pretty long list. Most of this is aimed at the state in terms of advocacy for state changes, both in their rules or statutes, as well as continued funding. We've seen over the last couple of legislative sessions a real investment in housing, and especially affordable housing. And so how can we continue to work with the state to continue that level of investment while at the same time, like accessible housing, we're limited by the state building code. Can we work with the state to change those rules so that we can require more accessible housing, especially for larger projects? And then I think I'm going to turn things back over to Ariel to just give you an overview of our engagement that we've been doing for the last 3 months, and what we've been hearing and how that's influencing the strategies going forward.
Thank you. So we began community engagement back when we started the housing needs analysis. We also came, I believe, to speak with Planning Commission about our plans for community engagement early on in January before we released the draft. Since then, we've implemented a multi-pronged approach to reach as many Portlanders as possible in a diversity of avenues and arenas. So we took the draft around and we took it to community and advisory groups. We also went to focus groups, both virtual and in person. We hosted an East Portland specific community meeting as well as a citywide open house. We opened a survey for about 6 weeks, and we engaged with developers through interviews, and we hosted technical advisory committee meetings as well as internal working group meetings where we worked with both regional and state partners, but also other bureaus to sort of refine and continue to develop the draft housing production strategy. This is just a list. I won't read all of them to you, but these are the folks whose meetings we attended, who we sought out for feedback. It ranged from advisory bodies within the city, such as the Development Review Advisory Council, as well as neighborhood coalitions, and then advocacy organizations such as the Fair Housing Council of Oregon and Oregon Smart Growth. We also enlisted the help of 2 contractors, Latino Belt and community engagement liaisons, to conduct some of our focus groups and community meetings. I will talk about some of these more in specific in terms of where they came from, but there are some shared issues across these different forms of engagement that came up as we looked to revise the strategies and gain more insights about the housing issues that are facing Portlanders. I think it's no surprise to anyone that affordability hits the top of that list in terms of being affordable to renters, but also in terms of the financial hardships that developers are facing in developing needed housing as well. We heard a lot about, as Tom mentioned, stability and not just getting access to units, but being able to stay in those units, so strategic paired assistance of different kinds. And we heard a lot about safety and location, which maybe not necessarily related directly to housing production, but as it relates to housing choice and opportunity, safety and location came up quite a lot. So a little hard to ignore. We also heard a lot about the different ways that we can improve processes in the code across a number of different opportunities. And as Tom mentioned as well, some opportunities in East Portland and Central City. And then lastly, I'll just say there's been an opportunity and a request from many different folks about increasing our commitment to action and reducing the softness of some of our strategies as we move forward to the next iteration of our housing production strategy. When we spoke with developers, we were looking for feedback on these draft strategies. So they got pretty detailed. They pretty much fall under these 3 buckets: finding ways to simplify the code or increase flexibility within the code, finding ways that the city can support the financial feasibility of development to get the needed housing that we hope to see, and then finding ways to improve permitting processes as well as other processes within the city to reduce impediments to barriers through regulatory changes, many of which might be solved with the implementation of the Permitting and Development Office that we'll be seeing set up over the next year. We had 6 BIPOC-specific focus groups. Latino Belt and Community Engagement Liaison Services helped us set up focus groups with Black, Latine, Slavic, Native, Chinese, and Vietnamese communities across Portland. I think it's no surprise again here, affordability is top of mind. Getting access to affordable units in locations and properties that feel both safe and accessible to other services and outdoor and green spaces came up quite a lot. We also heard that the quality of units and being able to access units that meet needs, not just affordability, but in terms of having accessibility as well as the appropriate size and rooms and space for having multi-generational households or having children, as well as being able to have community in the places that they are living, came up quite a lot during these focus groups. Additionally, we're still analyzing all of the responses, particularly the open responses for the survey, but we had the survey open for about 6 weeks. We received 350 survey responses. 36% of those were renters, and 3% were folks who identified either as houseless or having some other tenure besides renter or owner. When we looked at the responses, the majority of renters lived in multi-family or multi-dwelling units, and maybe unsurprisingly, the majority of our owners lived in single detached units. Just as a background of who is answering these survey questions, we had a really remarkable response rate for the people who took the survey. Almost everyone filled out every single question. When we look at the survey again, affordability top of mind, high importance in terms of looking at current and future needs. When we asked about location and importance of different qualities within a neighborhood, access to parks and natural areas was a clear winner. We also asked Portlanders what types of programs or assistance would be useful or helpful either now or in the future. The majority of respondents indicated some sort of financial assistance, so utility assistance, home repair. Home repair was for both renters and owners, down payment assistance to move from rentership to ownership, rent assistance, tax assistance, and other open-ended comments touched. We didn't specifically ask a question about safety because we went into it with a very production-oriented view, but safety came up in many of the responses of the open-ended responses in terms of feeling safe and comfortable both within their neighborhood, but also within properties, stories of properties not being secure or feeling unsafe. Were pretty predominant in our comments. Additionally, we saw comments around needing more space, larger units, and more rooms to accommodate households. We anticipate in the next iteration of the draft having a more full survey summary, so we have that to look forward to. We provided a brief one. We did all of this engagement, and I think it's important that we highlight what we're doing with that engagement. So we'll have comments tonight, and we will continue to receive map app comments. But through all of the engagement that we've already done, there's some clear indicators of items that when we were going out and looking to either understand if we got the priorities right in the production strategies or if there's still opportunity for growth, there's some clear outcomes. So we heard from Portlanders that we got it right when we talk about affordability, when we talk about homeownership, when we talk about aging in place and community, that process improvements, despite all of the work that we were doing, there's still more to be done, and a lot of opportunity to increase access. You'll hear opportunity probably 100 more times this evening, but we have more opportunity to increase access to choice, location, opportunity. But areas that we're already seeing that we can change or improve or highlight more in the draft to reflect Portlanders' priorities is that focusing more on our deepest need for affordability, that 0 to 30%, many of the strategies that are in the draft right now, look at more broadly at the 0 to 80% AMI, and we heard comments from a variety of stakeholders that 0 to 30 would be strategic and impactful. As we've mentioned, safety and livability as it relates to housing choice and location came up more. Maybe we shouldn't have been surprised, but it wasn't previously addressed in the draft housing production strategy. So we're looking at ways to more fully acknowledge that. One way is looking at livability and development in Central City. So that will be a change that's made, as well as addressing 82nd Avenue housing opportunity. We've received feedback about clarifying some of our language or clarifying what we mean in some of our strategies. And so the accessible housing strategies we've specifically looked at to provide more clarity on what those strategies could be. Additionally, incorporating transit-oriented development and service coordination for new housing development, as well as our existing housing, came up quite a lot. And then, as I mentioned previously, we've been working with our Bureau partners to look at where we can commit more fully to action to really show our commitment to implementing this as an action plan for the next 5 years. So with that, I'll pass to Tom to talk about where we're going next.
Yeah, so as we explained earlier, we have tonight as a briefing and an opportunity for public comment. And then we'll come back on June 11th for further discussion with you all. And then we'll begin to incorporate that feedback and the comments that we hear into the strategies themselves. And we expect to spend sort of the rest of June working with our Bureau partners to fine-tune the strategies themselves. with the goal of publishing the revised production strategy in mid-July, and then looking to take it to council later in the summer or early fall. We do have a state deadline of adopting the strategy by the end of this calendar year. So we want to sort of move it along and get it settled and focus on the work. And as part of our, even within BPS, our work program for the next fiscal year that starts July 1, a number, you'll see as you read some of these projects, we're already teed up to start digging into some of these strategies. So that's what we have for you tonight in terms of a briefing. Happy to answer any questions right now, or we can come back after the public comment.
Thank you very much, Tom and Ariel, for that great presentation. I did have one clarifying question regarding one of the feedback items from the developer engagement, which was partnership with institutions. Could you elaborate on what type of institutions? I'm assuming public education, but just wanted to see if there was any addition there. And then for fellow commissioners, if you have clarifying questions, we can go through those, and then we'll move on to public comment.
I don't recall what that connection was.
Yeah, I think that might be an item we could clarify later. It might be financial institutions.
Great, thank you. Any additional clarifying questions?
Yes, Mike Alexander, for the record. You showed the response rate for the surveys, and the houseless community was a very small percentage. What was the methodology of the survey? Was it online? Was it hard copy? I mean, how did you sort of?
Yeah, it was an online survey, and we worked with a number of those community groups that we were doing presentations with to sort of access their constituency, their membership, as a way of driving responses to that survey.
Great, thank you.
Additional clarifying questions? Okay, just checking online. So we will go ahead and proceed to public comment. We do have 31 individuals signed up this evening. I'm going to start with those individuals that have signed up to provide comment in person. So I will be calling folks up 3 at a time. Each individual will have 3 minutes, and you will get a notice when you're at 30 seconds left. So for our first 3, we have David Sweet, Michael Anderson, Peter Finley Fry. Please go ahead and come up to the presentation area. And then just as a heads up, after this first 3, we have Diana Stewart, Lejeune Thorson, and Jordan Lewis. Okay, welcome. So first up, we have David Sweet. Please do state your name for the record as you begin. And again, 3 minutes per individual.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is David Sweet. I live in the Cully neighborhood, where we're trying to hold on to the rich diversity that we love. I'm here today to advocate for strengthening Strategy C1 of the draft Housing Production Strategy, study multi-dwelling zoning changes in inner centers and corridors. For the last 53 years, I have lived mostly in the inner east side of Portland, in the Buckman, Irvington, Sabin, and Alameda neighborhoods. I've watched rents and real estate prices in those areas grow exponentially, and the former economic and ethnic diversity disappear as a result. For the last 11 years, I have lived in Cully, Portland's most diverse neighborhood, where rising prices are now causing displacement. A house near me that cost $400,000 10 years ago recently sold for $1.1 million. Used to be unheard of in Cully. The engine driving displacement in Portland is the lack of abundant housing, and particularly not enough housing in desirable, walkable, high-opportunity areas like the Inner East Side. Building a lot more housing there will reduce the price escalation pressure on neighborhoods like Cully and East Portland. I urge the Commission to recommend that the city not only study Inner East Side zone changes, but provide the resources needed to stand up a project to rezone the Inner East Side. One additional point, in 4 years of community engagement to create the Cully TIF district, we learned of the great need for home ownership opportunities for our lower income neighbors. Our friends at Habitat for Humanity and Proud Ground have been working to address that need in Cully and elsewhere. Home ownership is transformational for lower income families. The housing production strategy should support home ownership programs for families at below 80% of AMI. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Michael Anderson.
Thank you, Chair O'Meara and Commissioners. My name is Michael Anderson. I'm the Director of Cities and Towns for Sightline Institute. We're a regional sustainability think tank. This is the second time in a year that a bunch of us have come before you to urge the city to include, in its access to opportunity section of its housing production strategy, a commitment to launching and staffing, not merely to exploring, which is the current draft language, a project that would potentially advance what Portland Neighbors Welcome calls an Inner East Side for all. We each come to this position for slightly different reasons, and you'll hear some of those reasons in the next hour. But for my own couple of minutes, I wanted to point this out. We're advising the city to do what the City Planning Bureau itself has already recommended doing. Just 3 years ago, in the Anti-Displacement Action Plan Foundation report that came out of the commitments in the comp plan, BPS recommended that the best places for future upzones are parts of the city, quote, that are amenity and service rich and have few or no shares of vulnerable populations. Then, using a methodology informed by Dr. Lisa Bates' research at PSU, the city helpfully made a chart of which Portland neighborhood centers meet that description. That chart is on the half sheet of paper that Ms. Diefendorfer just passed around, and it'll be in my written testimony too. The lower right quadrant of that chart is the one the anti-displacement plan recommends for upzones, and I've added a check mark next to the neighborhood centers that would be most affected by Portland Neighbors Welcome's Inner East Side for All proposal. As you can see, our coalition of more than 20 local organizations is asking for upzones in many of the same neighborhoods identified by the Anti-Displacement Foundation report. This convergence isn't a coincidence. Among other things, I think what's going on here is that BPS is right. These are wonderful neighborhoods, and they're the best places for the city to prioritize more homes at a wider variety of prices, for all the reasons you're about to hear. I should say BPS's anti-displacement report also recommended investment in affordable housing in all 4 quadrants, and HPS can advance that too by taking the advice of Habitat and Proud Ground, as David just said. Yes, it's good that the city is studying the potential infrastructure considerations before committing to any specific zoning plan, but whatever that study finds next year, it's not going to be, there is no way to add more housing to the middle of Portland. Portland loves planning to plan to plan. But let's not get stuck just talking about planning. Please ask the council to commit to staffing an actual project so the necessary work of planning for growth can begin. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Peter Finley Fry, go ahead.
So, Peter Finley Fry, thank you for the opportunity to speak. As a joke, I would say if you really wanted to solve the problem, you would reunite the Portland, Prosper Portland and the Housing Bureau, since they were torn apart about 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And why is that important? The Portland is way overzoned, and I'm not going to be reading my letter, so you can read it. So everybody wants development, but no one really wants it when they get it. And so how do we build cities that grow with neighborhoods? And so I drive around Portland a lot. I look at Mississippi, I look at Sandy, I look at Division. I see a lot of development, a lot of new development. And so then I look at your housing study and it says we have underproduced in the last 20 years. So I think, what does underproduced mean? What does regular production mean? Are we going to have a triple Mississippi? Are we going to have a triple Division? Do you see what I'm getting at? Because these areas like Mississippi and Division require a lot of services to make them livable. And if you study this as carefully as we all do, you'd realize that development's not something you just talk about. It's something you have to engage people in, create community, create infrastructure, create opportunities. So I want to make that pitch strongly that we can't start just rezoning stuff and making stuff up. We have to start getting into the neighborhoods and building the neighborhoods from the interior up, not displacing, but empower the people that live within the neighborhood to build their housing, to build their opportunity, to build their accessory housing development in their backyard so they generate the wealth to build their own family and their own wealth. So I strongly urge you to get away from the rhetoric, get away from the talk, and start getting your sleeves up and dig into it. The last thing I want to point out is it's kind of ironic as a certified planner to sit here with you. We talk about growth, growth, growth. And then I read in the Wall Street Journal yesterday that India is not even replicating herself. India is the most growing country in the world and is not replicating itself today. So where is this growth coming from? Oregon is losing population today. So I'm not going to sit here and waste my time talking about a lot of different things that we can study. So I'm asking you two things. When you talk about this, talk about where are we really going? Demand from your planners current information about what is really going on in the world, because it's not what has been going on for the last 20 years. The second thing I ask you to do is think about empowering the neighborhood like we did in Central East Side. Don't try and blow areas out with new zoning, new developers. Try to figure out how to make the people within the neighborhood empower themselves to grow their own wealth. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Diana Stewart, LaJune Thorson, and Jordan Lewis. After that, we have one more person signed up to testify, or I'm sorry, to comment in person. That is Christopher Olson. Okay, so I think this will be our last group for the in-person comments. Okay, Diana Stewart.
Good evening, Commissioners. Excuse me. My name is Diana Stewart. I live in downtown Portland. I'm a member of the Land Use Transportation Committee of the Downtown Neighborhood Association, but I'm here today testifying on my own behalf. We've not had an opportunity to make a formal position in this matter. I've been actively involved for the last 6 years in the Portland City Code in development. Our organization has testified in front of the Design Commission, in front of appealed a decision concerning the River Place master plan to City Council. We've testified in every opportunity we've had. We've tried to stay on top of every development that's happening in the downtown. We are not a group that is trying to avoid growth. We are trying to plan growth to meet the needs of the downtown. I can tell you, because I walk the streets of the downtown every day, that the appalling misery that we see on our streets is my primary priority in speaking to you tonight. We need to be addressing that. That needs to be our focus. You know, I love the whole concept of urban planning. If I hadn't become a lawyer, I would have become an urban planner. But the house is on fire, ladies and gentlemen. We should not be studying where to put the hydrant. We should be studying how to put out the fire. I join with the folks who made the comments that the soft approaches are not the right approaches now. We need hard action plans. If this was a well-run business, the head of that business would be saying, give me your 90, 120-day, 180-day, 240-day plans. Who's responsible for it? Who's going to be doing what? How do we solve this housing need? I'm distressed to hear that the majority of what's being presented to you is 0 to 80%. I completely agree with the folks that said it needs to be 0 to 30%. In 2015 and 2016, a housing emergency was declared. What do we have today? We have strategies, we have plans, We have the Bureau saying that they're ready to dig into strategies. We should be digging into ground. We shouldn't be digging into strategies. Meeting with folks is great, but I could sit down with 15 diverse Portlanders, and in 2 hours, we'd come up with the very same needs that it took 6 months in talking with many, many groups to come up with. Now, I do want to point out that the neighborhood associations were not part of that outreach. We never heard that the Bureau was doing outreach and planning with people. We represent 500 downtown residents and businesses, and we were never part of the survey. No information came out to us. Sitting next to me is another member of our organization. She heard about this meeting today because she gets notices from other city groups. We never got a notice. We were not involved in the process. Couple of quick thoughts, because I know I only have 30 seconds.
You're actually over time at this
Oh, I'm
point.
sorry. Well, I hope that we can reapproach this and really dig in with an emergency perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm LaJune Thorson. I'm also a downtown resident. I'm on the board of the Downtown Neighborhood Association and on the Land Use and Transportation Committee. So as Diana said, we try to keep on top of what's going on downtown. We want, as I'm speaking on my own behalf, but I can say that the Downtown Neighborhood Association is very supportive of inclusionary housing and low-income housing. We have a wide range of income levels in downtown. And we want people to be able to live downtown who are the service workers, who are childcare workers, who work in restaurants. We want people to be able to afford to live near where they work. I'm here because I want to know how this policy that you're working on relates to the housing regulatory relief that the City Council passed recently. That was another one that we were not involved in. The survey went to developers. It didn't go to the neighborhoods or ordinary residents. So we weren't involved in that, and we testified about that because the neighborhood associations were actually taken out of the process, the input process of planning. We're no longer going to be notified of projects that are coming up in our areas, in our region. So we're trying to figure out how we keep on top of it without being notified. The requirement now is that a site have a posting on it that tells people that happen to see it that something is under development. But one thing that had me very concerned was when I found this article in the Oregonian, and I hope you have all seen this, May 19th, officials used millions meant for affordable housing to cover costs, watchdog fines. And we know downtown there are developers who buy their way out of providing inclusionary housing. They take the tax benefits or, the benefits that they can get, and then they can buy their way out of providing that inclusionary housing. Another thing they can do is say that they're going to provide housing on a different space. That doesn't happen either. So we'd like some of those loopholes closed. We would like, and I know this isn't your responsibility, but we would like to see that ability to buy out taken away. We don't think that should be an option. We want the inclusionary housing. We want the low-income housing. And like Diana said, it needs to be sooner rather than later. So I think my time is up. Thank you. Appreciate your listening.
Thank you for your comment. Julie, is the 30-second warning in place? It seems like it's going off after 3 minutes has passed.
Yeah, I thought.
If we can
Okay.
set it for the 30 seconds so folks get a heads up. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Jordan Lewis. Welcome.
Hello. Hello, Planning Commission. My name is Jordan Lewis. I live in the Goose Hollow neighborhood, and I'm testifying here today in support of Portland Neighbors Welcome's Inner East Side for All campaign. 5 years ago, I moved from my birthplace of West Virginia to live in a vibrant queer community here in Portland. Not only has Portland given me a welcoming community, but living on the dense west side has let my partner and I share a car, which has saved me thousands of dollars every year. I can put those thousands of dollars in savings towards rent or clothes on eBay. The hardest part of moving has been thinking about the people I left behind. I have gay and trans friends who still live there, and it's really concerning watching right-wing, hateful legislation pass in those states. However, I can't easily recommend that they move to a place with rents upwards of $1,400 for a studio or one bedroom, much less if I can't guarantee that they get a location where they can really live car light or car free. If we're going to see a queer people fleeing from these regressive southern states, it's Portland's moral responsibility that we accommodate these fleeing populations. In conclusion, I want to urge the Commission to unlock affordable and abundant and transportation-rich housing in the Inner East Side by re-legalizing low and mid-rise apartments from 12th to 60th and from Fremont to Powell. This could alleviate the ever-rising burden of rent on existing Portlanders, reduce displacement, boost Portland's lovely Inner East Side neighborhoods by connecting more people to services, businesses, and transit, and it could better integrate the city by breaking up historically segregated zoning regulations. Further, I urge you to fund homeownership options affordable to making less than 80% area median income, and identify publicly owned land which could be used for affordable housing productivity rather than simply be sold. And I want to echo Anderson's comment earlier. I think we should be pushing City Council to actually make tangible progress on this now, rather than simply planning to plan to plan. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and thank you to everyone who came in person this evening to provide comments. We're now going to transition to those individuals who have signed up to provide comments virtually. So I have first up as Christopher Olson. After that, we have David Binnig and Jerry Withun.
It looks like Christopher Olson is no longer online. So it looks like David Binning and then Eldo and then Sarah will be next based on who is here.
Okay, David Binnig and then Eldo Varghese.
And Sarah Radcliffe, those should be the next.
Okay, so Jerry Withun is no longer.
Correct.
Okay.
Not online, at least not now. I also want to make a note, and I'm sorry this is happening, the stopwatch factor is just beeping at the end point, not at the 30-second point. Not finding it right now, so.
Okay.
We can give an oral 30 seconds. It's showing in my screen if people are looking online. You should be able to see your final time left.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Okay, David Binnig, please go ahead and state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is David Binnig. I'm a homeowner. I live in inner southeast Portland in the Richmond neighborhood. I live on a quiet street where I can walk around the corner to businesses. I can bike to get groceries on pretty good greenway routes. The FX2 bus line on Division is a block away. My daughter's learning to ride her first pedal bike to the park at the end of our street. I like where I live. I want more people to have the choice to live here. And for that reason, I am asking that Section C1 of the Housing Production Strategy be strengthened to commit to a staff project to rezone and re-legalize more housing in high-opportunity neighborhoods like mine on the Inner East Side, not just on the busiest streets, but throughout the neighborhoods. I talked recently with a neighbor who lives in an affordable housing community just a few blocks away, which is being redeveloped to add more homes. Ultimately, this is a good thing, but it means he's going to have to move. He was offered a place in a newer building on Southeast Powell. He turned it down. He asked if I knew what it's like to live on a street like Powell. But in part because of the 40-year history of Portland concentrating new apartments on corridors, including affordable housing, when he does move, it's likely that he'll have to move into the noise and exhaust of Powell Boulevard or have to leave our neighborhood. Our city has been in a formally declared housing emergency for almost a decade now. The lack of homes in high opportunity neighborhoods affects people throughout the income spectrum. People who leave their homes, leave their neighborhoods to find homes they can afford elsewhere in the city. People who are displaced from those neighborhoods by the growing competition for homes. People who can't find any home at all. If we're going to change that cycle of displacement, we can start by letting more people live where they want to live and not study, but act to allow more homes in neighborhoods like mine. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Eldo Varghese.
Hi, my name is Eldo Varghese. I live in the Grant Park neighborhood, and my comments are my own. I'll keep my comments short. As with most towns and cities in the US that have high demand for housing, Portland residents deal with houselessness, whether chronic, episodic, or transitional. We deal with high costs associated with housing, whether rental or home ownership. We deal with reduced quality of life while dealing with high cost of living. These and other issues can be resolved with a few simple steps, even if the resolution can take multiple years. We must allow higher density housing, and I don't mean the city, county, or state has to build dense housing, just allow it to be built without excessive requirements. For example, minimum car parking, setbacks, etc. We must also provide high quality, affordable, and accessible transit. Allow for walkable neighborhoods through mixed use zoning. This does not mean that we should let developers and investors off the hook. We should require affordable units while these aforementioned dense housing is being built. We should not allow short-term housing investors, the so-called house flippers, to keep houses empty just to reduce supply and increase the housing prices. The current crisis will not be solved with small-scale solutions like adding more ADUs or small-scale neighborhood-based resolutions. I believe that we need to upzone large swaths of Portland and allow residents to organically create a lot more housing stock. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Sarah Radcliffe. After Sarah, we have Heidi Hart, Dave Petticolis, and Jennifer Such. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Sarah, I see you're on. Please go ahead and state your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Sarah Radcliffe, and I am testifying today on behalf of Habitat for Humanity Portland Region and Proud Ground Community Land Trust. Can you hear me? It doesn't look like my camera is on, but
we can hear you.
So we at Habitat and Proud Ground are enthusiastic about a lot of the good ideas included in the draft housing production strategy. Our main concern is that the strategy is broken into two separate tracks. Affordable housing, 0 to 80% AMI, focuses primarily on rental development, and increasing homeownership focuses primarily on households in the 80 to 120% AMI range. We think it's critical that the city address the homeownership inequities and thirst for homeownership among households below 80% AMI. As evidence of the demand for lower income homeownership, 2/3 of Habitat Portland Region homebuyers have incomes between 35 and 60% AMI. And we receive 800 to 1,000 applications for every 20 to 40 homes that we build. A home that's an asset, not just a roof, is truly transformational for families at that income level. It's the difference between moving multiple times a year, chasing affordable rent, switching schools, facing eviction, forgoing basic needs, and all the enormous stress that comes along with that, versus the security of 30 years and beyond in a comfortable, affordable home that your kids will inherit. Because Portland households of color tend to have lower incomes, we can't possibly address the 2-to-1 homeownership disparity between white and Black households and the legacy of city-sanctioned housing discrimination without a homeownership strategy for households with incomes below 80% AMI. If the average Black household income in Portland is $3,000 per month, then limiting our homeownership subsidies and incentives for households between 80 to 120% AMI will only exacerbate the racial wealth gap. In addition to focusing on homeownership below 80% AMI, there's a few concepts that we would suggest elevating. Community land trusts are cited as a possibility for exploration. We'd like to see CLTs and co-ops moved from an idea to a proposed strategy. There are a number of tools that the city could use to promote CLTs and co-ops, like land, down payment assistance, TIF, and other funds for development and construction, to name a few. And paired with that, we'd like to see a more fleshed out approach to the concept around a comprehensive citywide land banking practice. This is an excellent idea that's been in the works for some time. For example, in November 2022, Portland passed a resolution to build a land bank of up to 400 publicly owned sites to be ready for housing development. We'd like to see this, the priority level for this recommendation increased and a plan to work through the barriers that have prevented this good idea from materializing. And finally, we support the proposal to upzone the Inner East Side, and I can leave it there.
Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, thank you.
Up next, we have Heidi Hart.
Commissioners, I'm Heidi Hart. I'm a renter in the Buckman neighborhood and a board member of Portland Neighbors Welcome. I urge the city to commit to staffing a project that would consider upzones in high opportunity neighborhoods like mine. Buckman is a wonderful neighborhood to live in. I have easy walking, biking, and transit access to shops, parks, and grocery stores, and I am a 10-minute bike ride from downtown Portland. I live in a 1960s apartment that is on a quiet street where the sidewalks are shaded by mature trees. My zip code, 97214, has the second highest rate of bike commuters in the nation. The city's mapping has designated this area with the highest opportunity score of 5. And Buckman also has the 5th lowest median household income of Portland's 96 neighborhoods. Buckman is also 88% renter, which is the highest percentage of any neighborhood in the city. This is because Buckman has a wealth of more affordable housing types. I personally live in a 10-plex, and within a couple of blocks, there are more 10-plexes, single-family duplexes, an 1890s house that was converted to a 5-plex during the Great Depression, full-sized apartment buildings, and literally pretty much everything in between. I talked to my neighborhood association, the Buckman Community Association, about upzoning high opportunity areas in the Inner East Side last month. And one of the comments that stood out to me was from someone who talked about how they lived near Rainbow Road on Ankeny, right next to 28th Avenue. They were able to be a full-time student, work part-time, and live in a fantastic location because they could split the rent of a reasonably priced apartment. Nearly all of those reasonably priced apartments in Buckman were built before Portland downzoned most of this neighborhood, except for Arterials in 1980. Most of the neighborhoods in the Inner East Side don't have a huge number of historical small plexes and apartment buildings, and in effect exclude most people who cannot buy a home there, which is the majority of Portland households. The city should take concrete steps to opening up these neighborhoods to all Portlanders. One of these steps is to commit to a project and not just a study to upzone these neighborhoods. Another is to support Habitat and Proud Ground's call to prioritize land banking and fund affordable homeownership opportunities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Dave Petticolis.
Hello, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Dave Petticola. Thank you for your time and for the work that you have put into the production strategy so far. I would like to focus on the current proposal in section C1 to explore increasing housing capacity in high opportunity neighborhoods. This is a positive step, and thank you for making it, but I want to urge you and the city to go well beyond mere exploration and commit to staffing a dedicated project team to advance this critical initiative. Meaningful progress to address Portland's housing emergency requires a dedicated team to develop a comprehensive implementation plan. By committing to staff an actual project, the city would send a clear message that it is serious about addressing the housing crisis and about creating inclusive neighborhoods. This commitment will ensure that the conversation about expanding housing options in close-in neighborhoods will translate into tangible and effective action. Re-legalizing more housing options in these close-in neighborhoods would have far-reaching benefits. It would combat displacement and reduce competition for existing units, making housing more accessible both in those neighborhoods as well as across the city. Additionally, it would enhance the vibrancy of our neighborhoods by supporting local businesses and public transit. Finally, upzoning high opportunity neighborhoods would contribute to increasing equity by reversing the exclusionary zoning practices of Portland's past. I also support the proposals from Habitat Portland Region and Proud Ground to fund home ownership options for low and moderate income Portlanders and to prioritize publicly owned land for affordable housing development. These are crucial opportunities to create a more equitable and inclusive city. I urge you to be bold and forward-thinking. We are in a housing crisis, and we all need you to act with the forcefulness appropriate to the situation. Thank you very much for listening to my testimony.
Thank you. Up next, we have Jennifer Schuch.
And it looks like Jerry Withhoon has joined us, so if we can go back for online. Thanks.
I'm sorry, can I say something very quickly? David, you have the most calming voice I have heard all week, and I am not alone. Okay, thank you.
Happy to help. Thank you.
Okay, so Julie, are we going to Jennifer and then back to Jerry? Okay, Jennifer, go ahead, and then we'll go to Jerry after.
Great. Hello, my name is Jennifer Shook. I'm a Northeast Portland resident and VP of the Portland Neighbors Welcome Board. I'm here today with the following asks. Strategy C1 in the draft housing production strategy should be strengthened to ensure that adequate staff time and resources are dedicated to the initiative to upzone the Inner East Side. We are far past the time for exploration or study, and the HPS should reflect this. We also support our coalition partners, including Habitat for Humanity and Proud Ground, in calling on the city to commit to funding homeownership options for Portlanders making less than 80% AMI and making available publicly owned land that can be used for affordable housing. We cannot solve the city's housing crisis by commissioning study after study when we already know that far too much of the land in high opportunity neighborhoods, those with access to parks, infrastructure, schools, jobs, and transit, is zoned at the lowest possible density. Over the past few months, our members have met with Eastside neighborhood associations, coalition partners, and others to discuss this topic. In November, Portland Neighbors Welcome and Bike Loud hosted a ride in Southeast Portland, highlighting apartment buildings built before the 1980s downzone. We met tenants who said they loved living in the neighborhood, but that these buildings are starting to show their age. Today, they would be illegal to build. What happens when they are no longer livable? The city must hold more of these conversations across groups with varying opinions and implement a plan that meets its stated climate, equity, and housing goals. We also invite anyone interested to join our next bike event on June 8th in Northeast Portland. We believe in a city where people who want to live without a car can choose to do so, where there is an adequate supply of land on which dense housing at all affordability levels can be built, where people aren't kept out of high opportunity neighborhoods and forced to commute long distances because they can't afford $1 million home, where small local shops and cafes can thrive off of major arterials, and where quiet is not a luxury that only comes with homeownership. We believe this is possible for Portland, but only if the city commits to doing more than studying it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll go to Jerry, and after Jerry, we have Robert Galanakis, Joseph Antonini, and Aaron Brown. Jerry, welcome.
Thank you so much. My name is Jerry Withhoon. I'm a resident of Southeast in the Sunnyside neighborhood. I'm also an architect that has been working in the city for many years. I'm speaking on behalf of Strong Towns PDX. I was really interested in providing testimony tonight because I personally get to experience the value that Southeast Portland offers. Ever since moving here, I honestly rave about how amazing my life has been just because of the location that I live. I live in an area where I can walk to the dentist, go get tea, get my groceries, all within 2-block radius. This is an incredible place full of parks, amazing architecture, and most of all, the sense of community here is unlike anything I've ever experienced before. Neighbors here help one another out. We're always spending time talking on porch stoops. It's just a really incredible place. And so when groups like Portland Neighbors Welcome talk about high amenity and high resource areas, it's just abundantly clear that this area is one of them. One thing that we really need to do as a city is upzone this area. Even though there's incredible architecture here that my house itself is over 100 years old, there are still opportunity lots that could really benefit from higher density and bringing in more people that deserve to have access to these same amenities that myself and my neighbors around here enjoy. I think that it's going to be a very design-oriented type of upzoning to ensure that these neighborhoods preserve their character. And that's why we are asking the Planning Commission to really devote a study of this upzoning and allocate this as a true project. I think that it could be really harmoniously done and honestly truly benefit the neighborhood as well as all those coming into Portland that are looking for a place that's safe, is friendly, and is just an amazing place to live. And I think that these neighborhoods need to really open their doors and that we can do so in a way that makes everyone happy. So I wanted to thank the Planning Commission for considering this upzoning, and that's my time.
Thank you. Robert Galanakis.
Good evening, Commission, and thank you for pronouncing my last name correctly. It's pretty rare. My name is Rob Galanakis. I'm a resident of the Mount Tabor neighborhood, a board member of the Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association, Glencoe Elementary PTA president, and I also lead our weekly Glencoe bike bus. I grew up in the town of Lakeview, in Long Island, New York. Lakeview was one of America's first post-war suburbs, the black version of Levittown. My backyard was adjacent to the Southern State Parkway, one of the famous and early creations of Robert Moses. It'll come as no surprise we drove everywhere growing up. Despite having multiple Long Island Railroad stops, Lakeview was zoned to only allow density and commercial development along corridors and at centers. My mother, now 70, still lives in the house we grew up in. She has the good sense to recognize her driving abilities have decreased and her dependency on a car for every activity has hurt her quality of life. She's watched all of her children and grandchildren move away to more dynamic urban areas looking for better places to live. The arguments some made today about zoning and density are the same my mother would have made decades ago, but my mom knows better now. What she would give to be able to walk to a grocery store, to be able to downsize into a smaller apartment while staying in the same neighborhood, to be able to have her children and grandchildren live nearby, or at least have fun places to go when they visit. My mom now would be thrilled for more 4-floor and corner store buildings as I am. I hope to age right here on the Portland Inner East Side into my 70s and beyond. I hope my kids and grandkids can live nearby. I hope they take their diverse neighbors and their corner stores for granted. I hope they have no idea who Robert Moses is. For this to happen, we know we need zoning changes. Centers and corridors are not enough and have not been enough where it's been tried. We cannot continue to study half measures. I urge you to amend Section C1 to commit to a resourced project, not just a study, to upzone all Inner East Side neighborhoods, including my own. Thank you for your time and work on this.
Thank you for your comments. Joseph Antonini.
Hello, my name is Joseph Antonini. I'm 25 years old and I'm a renter in the Alphabet District of Northwest Portland. I'm here to advocate for the Inner East Side for All project from Portland Neighbors Welcome, not only for its goal to increase housing abundance, but also to create density in our urban areas and to establish what I think is going to be the future of Portland. I believe this project will have lasting benefits on our climate, our city's financial health, and the current housing crisis Portland and many other cities are experiencing. I was born and raised in Florida, where urban sprawl is pretty rampant and car dependency is very crippling for lower income residents. I moved to Portland to take full advantage of its robust public transit, dense living, and healthy lifestyle. And I believe that is what makes this city special and unique. I ask you, please commit staffing and funds to the Inner East Side for All project from Portland Neighbors Welcome. I truly think Portland has a unique chance to be the leader of sustainable urban design, and that can start with the Inner East Side for All project. Thank you for your time and for your commitment to making our city great. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Aaron Brown, and after Aaron, we have Ian Meisner, Matt Tuckerbaum, and Natalie Paravinci.
Thank you, Planning Commissioners, for your time today. Good evening. My name is Aaron Brown. I'm the Board President of Portland Neighbors Welcome. I'm a homeowner in the St. John's neighborhood. This weekend, I was lucky enough to help my partner move into my house. That is a joyous milestone in our relationship, but let me tell you, moving is exhausting. Figuring out boxes, how to move furniture, having to decide what to get rid of and what stuff to move across town, borrowing the cars to do so, cleaning out ahead of the landlord's deadline. We were lucky this time to have an easy move that was a choice and not the result of an eviction or a rent hike. But for many others that are less fortunate, moving is often expensive, stressful, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. This whole weekend, as I was collecting bruises, moving boxes around, I thought about how grateful I was to have my own house and how I must fight for greater housing stability to ensure that all Portlanders don't have to move around so much. And when they do have to move, they're doing so on their own timeline with plenty of time to figure out pesky details like finding a house in the same school district, on the same bus line, at a price and with the number of rooms that families can afford and need. The proposal by Portland Neighbors Welcome to add additional housing capacity in the Central East Side is by no means a silver bullet to creating more housing stability for our community, but greater housing abundance is a significant contributor to housing stability. And you don't have to take my word for it. Portland Neighbors Welcome has discussed our proposal with dozens of housing, environmental, transportation, and community advocacy groups. And our Inner East Side for All campaign has been endorsed by organizations including the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, Thousand Friends of Oregon, Habitat for Humanity, APANO, the Oregon Environmental Council, Oregon Smart Growth, Rose Community Development, Housing Land Advocates, Oregon Walks, Verde, and so many others. Please support the Inner East Side for All campaign and direct Portland City Council to commit to staffing the advancement of this project. You have the authority to do this, and your letter directing the City Council to staff this project makes it more likely that more Portlanders can call many neighborhoods home, and it also means I get to hang out with my friends without having to help them lug boxes out of their basement. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ian Meisner.
Hello, Planning Commission. My name is Ian Meisner, and I'm a Southeast Portland resident of the Sellwood neighborhood and a member of Portland Neighbors Welcome. I'm here today to urge the Planning Commission to support Portland Neighbors Welcome's call to strengthen Strategy C1 in the draft housing production strategy and request that the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability commit to launching a fully staffed project exploring broad upzones in the Inner East Side. Portland, like most American cities, is dealing with a housing crisis largely fueled by decades of restrictive, discriminatory zoning practices. As the cost of housing in Portland continues to be an extreme burden, we need to employ policy interventions that reckon with and directly address the missteps of our past. Portland's Inner East Side is comprised of some of our city's most desirable, amenity-rich, and well-connected neighborhoods. The urban form of these desirable locales is largely static, and our current zoning maps specifically guide new development towards the center city and business corridors. I believe this is insufficient to meet the housing needs of this important moment. While past initiatives like the Residential Infill Project have helped create new development flexibility here in Portland, early data suggests that Residential Infill Project isn't enough to unlock meaningful housing development in the Inner East Side. Policy 3.6 in the 2035 comp plan calls for land efficiency, specifically to promote the intensification of our scarce urban land while protecting environmental quality. And this is a goal that cannot be attained without broad upzones to the Inner East Side. As part of my volunteer work with Portland Neighbors Welcome, I've spent countless hours engaging with folks in Southeast Portland at their neighborhood association meetings, sharing our organization's vision of an Inner East Side for all, and discussing our city's housing affordability crisis. What I can say about this intentional effort to meet folks where they are and have difficult conversations about the housing issues facing Portland is there's a broad agreement that the city needs to step up and commit to projects and interventions, not studies. While zoning is only one piece of the puzzle to attaining abundant and affordable housing here in Portland, it is necessary that we create more flexibility in our high opportunity neighborhoods so that they can transform to meet our needs in the decades to come. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Matt Tuckerbaum.
Good evening, commissioners and BPS staff.
Thank you for providing this opportunity for public input on the housing production strategy before it reaches City Council. My name is Matt Tuckerbaum. I'm a member of Portland Neighbors Welcome and a homeowner in Richmond within the proposed boundaries of our campaign to re-legalize 4 floors and corner stores across the Inner East Side. Our city stands at a pivotal moment, and the HPS is an opportunity for us to change our collective trajectory. I firmly believe that this idea represents a meaningful opportunity to create a vibrant future for Portland, where neighborhoods can grow organically and provide a place for people of all ages, stages, and wages to thrive. At one point, we believed the residential infill project would accomplish this vision, but just as it was passed, the housing market changed dramatically. We've seen very little infill within our inner residential zones because land values have spiked so high. But while some variables have changed, the underlying needs have not. We need places where grandparents can move to be near their grandchildren without committing to owning and maintaining a detached house. We need small apartments off of loud, polluted arterials where artists can hear themselves think and express themselves in ways that enrich our public life. We need neighborhoods that are economically diverse so that teachers and care workers can live in the same wonderful places that the people they educate and care for do, so that they'll pass on the street, smile, and hug each other. Today, very little of this is possible in our inner neighborhoods without the blessing of immense economic privilege. That future is not possible without action by the city, and it will only get harder every day that we delay. Getting our neighborhoods to that wonderful future will take time, effort, and money from lots of people, but notably in a time of tight budgets, the decision to allow more freedom to house people in the ways they need is completely free. Accordingly, I urge BPS to revise Section C1 of the Housing Production Strategy. The section should dedicate a staffed and resource project to legalizing much broader housing options throughout our amenity-rich inner neighborhoods, not just in centers and immediately along corridors. At the very least, I hope you will align our zoning with the definition of corridors as found in BPS documents, with a quarter-mile buffer along either side. This would improve utilization of our public transit, boost our public health, and make real progress on our environmental goals to reduce driving and energy usage. I also support the proposal by Habitat and Proud Ground to build a meaningful land banking program and support the development of community land trusts to provide space for long-term affordable housing throughout the city. Similarly, I urge the Planning Commission to write a letter that signals strong support for this initiative. As Portland's expert advisory board on planning issues, a statement from this body would go a long way towards supporting staff in making the change and encouraging council to adopt it. Thank you for your time and consideration this evening. I hope that you find our testimony this evening compelling and take action accordingly.
Thank you. Okay, next I show Natalie, but I don't see Natalie online. Okay, so we're going next to Tim McCormick. After that, we have Jonathan Greenwood and Zachary Lesher. Tim, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. Good evening, Commission and members and BPS staff. My name is Tim McCormick. I'm the Director of Housing Alternatives Network, also a contributor writer at Sightline Institute. I also am a native-born Portlander, have lived there on and off for over 50 years, and I say there because I'm now, at this point, fully displaced out of Portland. I was pushed out of housing into homelessness in the last few years, and at this point, essentially fully out of Portland. And one of the things that is making me most feel that it's not likely I'll be able to come back to Portland is actually watching the progress of the Oregon State planning as it has led to the present housing production strategy. I work very closely on ONA, which is the framework leading to this. And what I've seen is basically an almost unbridled drive to expand state and government control and decision-making to the point where what we have in front of us is a policy that aims to have government-controlled income restricted housing be over 50% of all new housing in Portland. And at this point, I just see little in it in any way that offers me a likelihood of living in Portland or feels that I'm welcome there. And I should back up and say that when I was born in the 70s, my father was the Director of Comprehensive Planning and the Director of Housing at Portland Planning Bureau. So I've watched closely and studied Portland planning and Oregon planning throughout this time. And I've come to the conclusion that at this point, it has gone way down a wrong track or several wrong tracks of extreme faith in government control and decision making. At the same time, there's really a deep erosion in perceived efficacy and accountability of local and state government. So where this leads to, I actually, believe it or not, have a quite positive, I think, constructive angle, which is over the last couple of years in discussion with many people, including Sightline and DLCD people, what I've been working on is an idea for what I think is really crucially needed and what I may be in a relatively good position to do, being not beholden to anybody as being displaced from it. And that is to create an independent body and platform and initiative. You could call it Open Housing Oregon. And what it would address is basic problems that were raised, for example, by the auditor in the controversy over inclusionary housing. There is a multitude of programs and there's a multitude, literally dozens of goals, and there's almost no way that we are prioritizing or assessing completion of those goals. And I propose an open public platform that would systematically rate and evaluate and prioritize which directions of policy and which projects ought to have preferment in policy. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to developing this further in conversation with you.
Thank you for your comments. Jonathan Greenwood.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hello, Commission. My name is Jonathan Greenwood, and I am speaking as a concerned Portland resident as well as a member of Portland Neighbors Welcome, though not in an official capacity. I appreciate your support of the Increasing Access to Opportunity initiative in the housing production strategy and for addressing the need to redress mistakes from past zoning practices. These efforts are crucial for tackling Portland's high housing costs and promoting equity. Section C1 should go beyond just a study and expand its scope. Please amend C1 to dedicate a staffed and resourced project to upzone entire inner east side neighborhoods, not just centers and corridors. 4 floors and corner stores will promote opportunity, fairness, affordability, and abundance of housing for all Portlanders. Please support these changes as this draft moves to the City Council. While I understand the committee not voting on amendments to the housing production strategy at this time, a letter of support would be instrumental in encouraging the Council to adopt this initiative. Finally, we really need to think about the future of dense neighborhoods by planning for very big investments in our public transportation network. Car-free living is the future to save us from climate catastrophe, and I want our city on the forefront. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Zachary Lesher.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Zach Lesher. I'm a Buckman renter, and I'm here testifying in support of the Internet East Side for All campaign because I have some dear friends, a couple, who live in the suburbs who want to move into the city because they only have one car between them. And this severely limits their mobility while living outside Portland proper. One of them is a student, so their income is limited, and they're trying to find regulated, affordable housing. Watching their search has been very dispiriting because the majority of places they can find are on Powell Boulevard, which is likely known by everyone here being dangerous, loud, and polluting. I do not think working people in our region should have to choose between living in a place where they have to spend a painful amount of their income on transportation, or a place where their only option is living near a high-crash corridor that exposes them to both acute and chronic health risks. While the multi-dwelling zoning changes plan advanced by the coalition in favor of Inner East Side for All would not solve these friends' dilemma tomorrow, committing to fully staffing such a project rather than only funding a study and expanding it beyond centers and corridors to a much broader area would make many more sites viable for affordable housing development and would give future young couples in the same situation as my friends many more choices. I think we owe it to all of those like them to apply these recommendations broadly and to take action with the urgency our housing crisis demands. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we have Sarah Berry. After Sarah, we have Mitch Green, Luke Norman, and Timothy Slevin-Vegdahl. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you. And I apologize in advance because I'm on my phone and I can't see a timer. So if you could just tell me when to stop. I'm a Portland homeowner. I live in Richmond now. I grew up on Northwest 21st in Irving. My parents moved there in 1962 from San Francisco. And having rented a place briefly in a residential neighborhood. They went to a movie at Cinema 21 one night, and my mom looked around and realized that because my dad worked downtown at the Oregonian and took the car, she saw that neighborhood as being the perfect place to live with two little kids where she could walk to a market around the corner. There was a school, there was a park. It was extremely economically diverse, you know, because my father made very little money, and they paid $99 a month for an entire house. But single homes were like the minority in that neighborhood. My neighbors were all old folks who lived in converted, you know, houses that had been converted during the Depression or whatever. There was a boarding house run by a Chinese family across the street. There was a Greek immigrant family. There were many apartment buildings on that block and thriving businesses. And I lived my first 14 years there. It was a great neighborhood. And the main point I want to make is that the conversion thing also promoted home ownership, because the people I knew in that neighborhood who ended up being able to buy were buying condominiums in big old houses that were being broken up and converted. And that was along 24th Avenue and 25th Avenue in Northwest. And one of those people was my mom, who was able to buy a condominium in a big old house after my parents divorced. So, you know, flash forward to when I have a big old house, 4 rooms in the Buckman area on 23rd and Salmon. My kids are gone, and my husband and I want to turn it into a duplex. So we talked to some contractors, and they literally told us that it would cost more to convert that house into a duplex than it would to tear it down and build the duplex from scratch. And I was like, I was surrounded by duplexes and quads and triplexes, that many of which were converted. And there were no, you know, I don't know, I didn't see a whole lot of dangers coming out of that situation. And lastly, we have a friend who owned one of the duplexes there and was retired and didn't want to be a landlord anymore. He wanted to sell the duplexes to the existing renters as condominiums. And he spoke to a lawyer, and that lawyer laughed at him and said, no, that's impossible. There's no way you could afford or want to take the time to deal with trying to do that. So that's just my anecdotal information about what made my neighborhood in Portland growing up great. You know, the other thing about economic diversity in that neighborhood is that you could buy everything you needed on foot. And now, I don't know if you've seen, you know, spend time on 21st and 23rd Avenues, but you know, there's not a hardware store or a pharmacy in sight, you know? And so businesses change as neighborhoods gentrify. And so, you know, it's great, it's still dense, but without affordability,
Sarah, you are
you
at
don't
time.
really have. Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, next up we have Mitch Green.
Thank you, Commission, for hearing us tonight. My name is Mitch Green. I am a homeowner in Southwest Portland. I am a PhD economist and a candidate for Portland City Council District 4. I'm here today to echo calls I've heard tonight for a bold approach to what I call an abundance agenda for Portland housing, one that is action-oriented, and to lend my credentialed expertise to the Portland Neighbors Welcome proposal. So while I live in West Portland, I think housing scarcity affects us all, wherever we live. When there's not adequate housing in the inner east side, folks get priced out and decide to move further and further from their jobs, friends, social lives, and all the other great reasons to love close-in living in Portland. The consequences, of course, manifest as traffic congestion, an ever-increasing housing cost inflation, which fuels ongoing displacement. And of course, the worst consequence of all is the risk of losing shelter altogether. The root cause of this is a lack of density. This is a problem that affects us all, and we will continue to. It will continue to be a barrier to meeting our capacity targets that named in the very plan that we heard tonight. So I echo Diana from the Downtown Neighborhood Association, who commented on the urgency of the moment. Look, we are in a crisis. The house is on fire, and we should be moving and looking for opportunities to make a direct and immediate impact. So, as an economist, you know, I like low-hanging fruit. So it makes a lot of sense to invest resources that will promote an increase in density in opportunity areas like the Inner East Side. That's why I really like that campaign that Portland Neighbors Welcome is advancing here. There's just a good opportunity for a good return on investment for the city there, and to make a meaningful impact in our housing crisis and makes folks' lives better. So my very specific ask today would be to prioritize the funding asked to City Council to staff that upzoning project so we can move forward, take action, and quit sort of studying the problem to study a problem to study a problem. This is low-hanging fruit. Let's get it done. And I really appreciate your time and thank you for your service in the commission.
Thank you for your comments. Luke Norman.
Hello, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Luke Norman, and I encourage you to support the housing production strategy today and to strengthen Section C1 to fully fund a project to relegalize apartments in some of Portland's highest opportunity neighborhoods, like you've heard from many others tonight. As a longtime renter, I recently moved from Northeast Portland to the Alphabet District in Northwest for many of the reasons that Sarah mentioned in the earlier testimony. For the 5+ years I lived in Northeast, small businesses always seemed to struggle to create a vibrant commercial hub along Broadway with a steady churn of vacancies as businesses opened up and closed on the street. By contrast, Northwest not only supports bustling shops like along 21st and 23rd, but also small commercial nodes on places like Thurman and 24th, where you can walk or roll to the grocery store, doctor's office, or the movies within 15 minutes, and still get to the hardware store that's moved down the street off Everett. One of the key differences is that Northwest allows a mix of new and old apartments, townhomes, and single-family homes throughout the neighborhood. Some of those that were built in the past, like the ones that Sarah mentioned seeing when she grew up, and also new apartments that continue to be built there to provide new opportunities for new families and new people moving to our neighborhood. Unfortunately, in Northeast, we prohibit new apartments just a couple blocks off Broadway, which starve businesses of the customers they need to thrive and grow. By strengthening C1 into a fully funded project, you can empower Bureau of Planning and Sustainability staff to legalize more neighborhoods like Northwest, so Portlanders of all incomes, races, and ages have the opportunity to live in delightful neighborhoods that supports thriving local businesses like I do. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Timothy Slevin Vegdal.
Planning Commission. My name is Timothy Slevin Vegdal. I live in the Goose Hollow neighborhood, and I spend a lot of time in mixed-use developments in my neighborhood, but also throughout the city, because frankly, they're just great places to be. I urge you to commit staffing to a project that would upzone and allow mixed use in the east side. Upzoning the whole area will pay for itself in increased tax revenue and allow us to house more people more affordably. On a more personal note, though, upzoning and mixed-use development is important to me because when a grocery store is 2 minutes away versus 10 minutes away, it drastically improves the way I interact with food. If it's a 5-minute trip, I'm more likely to make daily trips for fresh produce instead of taking weekly trips full of non-spoilable processed foods. Plentiful corner stores can make an impact on the health of Portland. Again, please commit staffing to consider upzoning the east side. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Doug Klotz.
Hi, my name is Doug Klotz. My wife and I live in the Richmond neighborhood in an old house 4 blocks from Hawthorne, where there is already one 1927 18-unit apartment building among the blocks of single houses. There's room for many more apartment buildings, which would be within such close walking distance of so many stores, shops, the library, grocery stores. It's just a great place to live, and we need to have more apartment buildings there so more people can live there. And for today, what we need Planning Commission to recommend to Council the immediate initiation of a project to rezone much of Inner East Side Portland for 4 floors and corner stores. This should not be delayed 6 months for a study. I'm confident BPS can do this more quickly to have the greatest impact and to start making a difference now. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have Ann Casper? Okay. Stephen Judkins? Okay. Our final individual for public comment this evening is Will Hollingsworth.
Hi there, can you hear me?
We can, but it's quite quiet. If you could speak up a
Okay.
little bit.
I'll shout loudly into my computer. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to hear us this evening, and thanks especially to the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability for the excellent work they've been doing on the housing production strategy. My name is Will Hollingsworth. I'm a renter in the Goose Hollow neighborhood down in Southwest, and I'm also a member of Portland Neighbors Welcome. I'm testifying today to tell you something that people, I think, have been telling you for about an hour now, which is that I think Section C1 of the housing production strategy needs to be transformed from a study of possibilities to a fully staffed project to upzone the Inner East Side of Portland to allow more Portlanders and other folks to live in that area and live in some of the highest opportunity areas of our city. To my way of thinking, much of what makes Portland special and much of what makes Portland unique, its strong DIY ethos, its artistic sensibility, its, focus on food in the outdoors and any number of excellent recreational opportunities that other cities in the country don't have are underpinned by the ability of people to have access to low cost and abundant housing in the city, and to have access to housing in central areas of the city so that they can go to work without needing to use a car, so that they can interact with other people in their music or artistic scenes. And so they have access to all of the very basic daily amenities that people need: pharmacies, schools, their jobs. All of this is predicated on having an abundance of affordable housing in the central city. And so I think it's incumbent upon the Planning Commission to push forcefully to write a letter to the City Council to make sure that a project to upzone the Inner East Side isn't just a thing that we study ad nauseum, but it's a thing that we put real financial teeth into, that we dedicate staff hours to, and that we all, as a city and as a political body, commit to supporting and upholding. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments. That concludes the oral comments for this item. We will close the oral comment period now. Written comments can still be accepted and submitted via the map app until June 11th. So ask Tom and Ariel to please come back up and join us, and we'll open it up for commissioner comments or questions at this time. Okay, are there any clarifying questions? And then we'll do our round robin, since we've got at least one commissioner eager to get to that. Any clarifying questions before we do that? Yes, Vice Chair Pouncil, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just worrying there was an acronym used, CLTs. Wasn't quite sure what that meant. Is anyone familiar?
Two meetings in this discussion. I think it was in reference to community land trusts.
Okay.
So as a form of nonprofit ownership.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I will invite, did you have one more?
Yeah, I kind of do.
Go ahead. Yeah.
And then there was also revolving loan fund.
Yeah, some forms of housing incentives or finances are grants. It's money out the door. It goes into the project. A revolving loan fund is basically a lower interest loan. And so whoever the recipient has to pay that back. And the idea is over time that you get to recirculate that funding through multiple projects. And so it sort of continues. It's a long drawn out process, but it's not a direct grant, and that money is spent and gone, and there's some expectation that over time you'll get money back and can reinvest it in new projects.
Thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner Lane.
Does Portland have any minimum parking requirements now?
For residential projects, I don't believe we do.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lang, Patricia Diefenhofer, just for the record, the only, if you recall from the parking project we did, was it earlier this year? No, totally
Last year.
forgot. Last year. Yes, last year. There were, if you recall those maps, where there was just some sort of more on the edges, single dwelling areas that were not part of the completely eliminating parking requirements. So I don't even think those necessarily have minimums. They might have maximums, but there's just some areas at the perimeters of the city where there is some requirements for parking. Or the state rules around the climate friendly, equitable, yeah, those don't apply to those peripheral areas. But if you remember, they were very minimal areas.
Go ahead, Commissioner Spivak.
Thank you, Commissioner Spivak, for the record. Well, we heard a little testimony about study versus jump forward. So I thought I'd just give staff a chance to share the logic in the proposal to study zone changes rather than to embark on a project.
Yeah, I think that's sort of around the tension of how much can we commit to right now versus what is dependent on future staffing, future funding from future councils, and sort of recognizing the transition moment that we are in. And yet at the same time, you know, as Ariel pointed out, we've heard a lot, and we heard a lot tonight about what can we do to sort of up that commitment. And this is a moment, again, you know, you heard the call for the commission to weigh in on this issue and elevate that level of importance. It's something that we heard at council as part of the housing needs analysis testimony. I expect that when we get to council, we'll hear it again. But I think from our standpoint, the original study was just that. You know, we knew we were getting a grant to study the infrastructure capacity. We know it's something that we want to do, but it is not an official project yet that, you know, we have all of this staffing and funding lined up. And so I think this is one of the things that is, for the first time around of a housing production strategy. I mean, what can we commit to? I think it's something that we've struggled with our other bureau partners. Looking out 5 years and what are you going to be working on 5 years from now is a really difficult proposition for any agency, and especially in this time where we're transitioning our government and our bureaucracy, it makes it even more of a challenge.
Commissioners, maybe if I could just add one point to that. I think there was also, this was deliberate in some respects, because the idea was that we first should start with, we know that sometimes infrastructure can create a challenge for actually building housing projects, even in areas where the zoning already allows it, right? So this was kind of an intentional, it's almost like creating a building block to the future potential rezoning of some of this area, is to sort of understand, if you assume certain levels of increased or growth in this area, what would that mean with respect to the infrastructure, and what gaps in the infrastructure might we, you know, expect? How do we understand better what the infrastructure needs of that area might be? So it's both what Tom said about this moment, and, you know, the commitment and also the resources to embark on this project, but it's also about taking this preliminary step of understanding what would be the infrastructure needs if we were to assume greater growth in this area, and use that as a building block for informing potential future rezoning. So just wanted to kind of add that as well.
Wade Lang, for the record. I wanted to ask this question more for my own edification, but, and I wasn't going to ask it except maybe to talk to you afterwards, but it came up in testimony, and that's that the city declared a housing emergency quite some time ago. And as I talk to people in the city of Portland, there's always the head scratching around, well, what does that really mean? So how does the city declaring a housing emergency inform the work that you've done here? And what is the urgency placed on that via the housing emergency declared and renewed throughout different administrations?
Yeah, I think initially back in 2015, 2016, the emergency declaration allowed us to sort of waive certain zoning requirements, especially when it came to siting shelters and like safe rest villages and that sort of thing. And so we were able to more quickly act and not have zoning be a barrier to sort of expanding those opportunities and temporarily. And we've done a lot in the interim to change the zoning, especially around shelters and the shelter to housing code project that we did a few years ago to, change the zoning rules around where you can site shelters, how big they can be, is it a conditional use or an allowed use, and that sort of thing. I think what you've seen from the city as a whole is that it's a moment to sort of elevate the issue, and what came after that was a citywide housing bond for affordable housing, which led to a metro regional bond. We've seen a number of different zoning code projects. The shelter to housing code is one of them, residential infill, the revamp of our multi-dwelling zones and our commercial mixed-use zones, all with an eye of sort of both increasing density overall, but also increasing the zoning bonuses for affordable housing as well. And so, and then more recently, it's led into the permitting streamlining and more focused on those issues. So I think it's really part of a sort of continuing process and continuous improvement to continue. At the same time, we're subject to larger forces, right? Than I think even in thinking back to 2018, 2019, there was always this feeling that we were at the end of a business cycle, that, when's the next recession coming? And then that didn't really come, but then the pandemic hit, and that was a huge disruption, and now we have high interest rates. And so I think, the city's acknowledgement that this is a major issue, you've seen a lot, on both sort of the homeless shelter end of things, as well as now we're focusing even on, and as you heard tonight, sort of the moderate income housing opportunities as well. So I think it's just a continuing evolution of the problem and how to address it. But I also think it shows, again, what we talked about is the city only can do so much, has only so many resources, has so much control. I mean, we've shown in that we have pretty permissive zoning, and yet, the development can be there or not be there. But then, it even leads to things like the reforms that we did around the inclusionary housing program as a way of that feedback and correction process that keeps going on.
I see Vice Chair Thompson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a couple of questions, and I wanted to start by asking about the priority level. And I'm sorry if I missed this or didn't grasp it in the presentation, but can you talk a little bit more about how the priority level was assigned to each of these different strategies?
Yeah, I think that it really gets at that timeline. Like, are we a higher priority project is something that we're going to take on in the next 1 to 2 years, something that we can really foresee, and that our bureau partners are that they foresee taking that project on. I think as I was explaining, the further out we get, a little more, it gets a little more murkier as to, when and how much of a commitment there is to taking on that project. And I think that's where we get the challenge in those out years, in that year 4 and 5. It's like, yeah, we know that's an issue that's out there. I think the Inner East Side zoning revisit is an example of that project. I mean, it is something that has been on the BPS strategic plan now for a number of years. It's an issue that we identified back as part in sort of the 2016 timeframe as part of the comprehensive plan update, as sort of, if you look at especially the inner southeast corridors of Belmont Hawthorne Division, that is something that going back to the 1990s, we didn't get to the community planning process that you saw in Albina and Southwest and Outer East. That program sort of fizzled out in the mid-90s, and we just never got around to it. And we didn't do an area plan for that area like we did for Hollywood or St. John's. And so I think it's something that we've recognized we need to do. And so that I think this is a moment for us to be more intentional about that.
Can I check,
Thank you.
is fizzle the right word, or is it more like flamed out?
I guess where I was going with that question is wondering if the priority was based on impact in the different initiative areas. And it sounds like that may be the case, but it's more directly tied to timeline. One of the things I was curious about was just the linkages across initiatives with some of these strategies. I mean, they're bucketed in this way that I think helps to, it's a nice way of telling the story of what you're trying to do. But obviously, some of these potential projects could have the opportunity to advance many of the different initiatives or goal areas. And I'm wondering if you've mapped that out in any way, or if that thinking is developed. Because if, for example, the East Side project, the Inner East Side project, if that was to move forward, ahead of some of these other things, it may be that that's an opportunity to explore a low carbon building approach, or what does it mean to incorporate age-friendly design into the zoning code. And so I was trying to understand the priority level and like the way that some of these are bucketed from that standpoint to see where the biggest opportunities emerge and how much they could accomplish. So yeah, I don't know, there's not really a question there, but if you have anything to add, or if that sort of mapping has been done across the different initiatives, I'd be really interested to see.
Yeah, we really haven't done sort of a formal mapping. I mean, I think we recognize the linkages and the crossover there. But we were trying to organize these categories so it was accessible and understandable, especially to a community that may not be steeped in land use policy and zoning issues. But I think I touched on this in the briefing, like something like accessible housing can pop up in a number of different areas, both sort of on a state legislative agenda, but also in the zoning bonus and incentives. And so I think the opportunities are certainly there. And I think you can start to see it in some of like the low carbon neighborhoods as some of the assessments. And I think as we get into a project, or, even like that's just another reason to take on a project like revisiting the zoning in the inner neighborhoods, is because you get multiple benefits. It's a high access opportunity area. It is a low carbon neighborhood with low VMT and high transit access and bike access. And so all of those reasons for doing that project begin to stack up.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Spivak, would you like to kick us off on some quick round robin comments for those of the commissioners that have it to close us up tonight?
Thanks, Commissioner Spivak. For the record, I'll try and be quick. I've got 4 topics, but I'm not going to be in person at the next meeting. I'll have to be remote, so I'll try and say while I'm here. First, and a couple of these are responding to testimony, or a couple are just me as a kitchen cabinet based on review of the proposal. Expanding opportunities for affordable housing is hit as a high priority. That was a terrific project. I'm glad we did it. I hope, and for those who didn't know, that was targeting upzoning of faith-owned properties or nonprofit-owned properties for redevelopment of affordable housing. I would request, though, that I'd like to see what came out of the first round and make that the high priority. And if it worked out well, then let's jump on this thing. If not, it might not be as high a priority. Second thing is land banking. I agree with the Habitat's testimony to increase the focus on that. Habitat's got experience. Last recession, some donor made a big gift to Habitat, and they snapped up a lot of land when land was cheap. Land's cheap right now. We should be looking at opportunities to acquire it and identify public property. And it's not just land. Last October, I'm just getting a couple quotes here, like 141 unit apartment building sold for $206 a square foot, right? 202 units sold for $260 a square foot. We can't touch that with affordable housing. These are new buildings, no renovation needed. Within the past couple weeks, 73 units just sold. I don't know what it sold for, but the listing said below cost, right? There's more coming. So I don't know how fast this can happen, but Portland should be nimble when the opportunity presents itself. Third thing is climate-friendly and healthy homes. I can't share this with everyone because it's on my screen, but ODOT did Department of Energy of Oregon studied the life cycle greenhouse gas impacts of average new homes. 15% of that is the embodied energy to build the home and to replace things over time in the house, over the life cycle of a house. 80% of it is heating, cooling, is operating the house. So the 2 proposals here that are top in the listing are, and I have nothing against them, but they have to do with the other version of CLT, cost-limited timber construction, which does substitute for concrete to decrease carbon impacts. And the other item I think that I noticed was embodied energy of buildings, which is a great sort of the edge of building codes. But that's chipping away at the 15%. The real big opportunity here is the other 80%. And I have another volunteer gig. I'm wearing a shirt from it, right? But is to power our homes with clean electricity. That means getting rid of resistance electric heat and going to heat pumps, getting rid of gas, which also has health consequences for homes. That's part of the tagline too. So I think that should be one of the proposals for that end. And the last thing, I think Ariel Kane nailed it with a little description of the city's not projecting much new growth in the RCAA, a weird acronym, but racially constrained areas of affluence in some of the closest neighborhoods because there's less zone capacity there. And since there hasn't been much development in the past 20 years, there probably won't be in the next 20 years. So the comp plan talks a lot about equity. And from an equity perspective, that's not a feature, that's a glitch. That means that we have a map that doesn't comprise with the goals of our comp plan. And I think that if we had the benefit of the analysis that you have right now of the RCAA and Dr. Bates' analysis before that, we wouldn't have a comp plan that says it's really important to have equitable access to housing and complete neighborhoods. And on the other hand, have a zoning map which shows very low density in places you can walk to downtown from. So I think this call for action, which I heard across the spectrum, and I think City Council would like to have action in front of them, will be to try and rectify that inconsistency. And in terms of like the timing, I appreciate hearing the infrastructure issues, but a lot of stuff's rushing through City Council right now, including some TIF districts, several of which are in East Portland. That's going to allow more people to live in East Portland. There's some benefits to there, but we also, the last project we did was the Southeast Uplift. What was the name of that project? In Southeast, we did an upzone, Southeast Rising.
Lower
sorry.
Southeast Rising.
Lower Southeast Rising, which also upzoned that area. Why did we never get around to the closed-in neighborhoods? They got skipped over deliberately a long time ago. So I think that there's an appropriate call for action on this. And some of the things are rushing. These TIF districts are on a, I don't know how hard they're working to prosper Portland, but they're going fast to get this done with the current city council. Everybody, it seems like, is running for election, and they're all talking about housing. Let's give them something. So I think that that's something that could happen with this project. And I will leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Spivak. Other comments from commissioners? Vice Chair Pouncil.
Yeah, Vice Chair Pouncil for the record. I guess I just more or less have a comment. Like there was this, I guess disability housing. From my experience, I always see disability housing as like everybody housing. It seems to me that if you are able to be in a home that everyone can move in, then that's a greater home for the present, for the future. And it'd be great to have some consideration of really expanding that out. Maybe not look at it as a disability, but as an everybody housing and more inclusive housing for everyone. So that was mainly it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Routh.
Commissioner Routh, for the record, the joy of going after Commissioner Spivak is that I get to do all the dessert things. So yes, everything that Eli said. I think of a couple of points that I just want to also thank everyone for their testimony. Everyone who came here today on Zoom, and also we had at least 83 pieces of written testimony on the MAP app, which will, as Chair O'Mara mentioned, be open until June 11th. So we look forward to hearing more comments. But I was thinking particularly, I believe it was Tim Slevin Vigdal talking about food, the relationship of food, which I was actually thinking about yesterday, kind of like housing production strategies according to Netflix. I was watching Samin Nosrat's Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, and just like watching her walk down the street and all of the small business owners that she gets to interact with when there is higher density residential in the neighborhood, and how that relationship between high opportunity areas and vitalization of small businesses, and how those go together. And the other special I think of is Old Enough. Have you ever seen this? Which is it's a Japanese. Have you seen? Okay. I get to introduce something today. This is wonderful. Breaking news. It's a Japanese serial about like very small children being asked to go out and do a specific task, and because the neighborhood is safe enough and walkable enough, and there are so many eyes on the street, that it's safe and they can do so. And it's like I think that hearing a lot of the testimony this evening, those are the neighborhoods that I think all of us, at least more of us, want to live in. And so how do we ensure that this housing production strategy, and I also hear that like we are the city that meets, and maybe it's time to actually act. We're very good at talking. I am very good at talking, obviously. Here we are. And the last thing, I appreciated Sarah Radcliffe's comments around lower than 80% AMI for home ownership. Except for 1 year that I have ever lived in the United States, I have qualified for rental assistance. I don't have to do it because over 10 years ago, I bought a house in Lentz, and I will tell you my monthly rent is less than $1,000. That is, my friends, is rent control. And that is what is allowable. That is what homeownership provides, that stability, that ability to do other things with your life rather than spending 40% plus on rent. So, thank you. That's all I got.
Thank you, Commissioner Routh. Well, I want to first express appreciation for the summary of community engagement. I found it very clear, easy to track. I was also really heartened by the comments we've received and just the resounding support for housing and specifically affordable housing, which tracks really congruently with the data that shows that we need to produce substantial in the units in the 0 to 80%, but the focus on 0 to 30% is really where we need neighbors to show up. And so I wanted to comment about some of what we heard about neighborhood associations feeling like they weren't contacted or reached out to. As a volunteer with a neighborhood association, I understand how that can be difficult. And so both appreciation for our neighbors to show up today and also please keep showing up because that's where we really do need the support and we need the advocacy for the 0 to 30%. So that's when the strategy comes in, right, around the state and federal resources. So thank you to everyone. And we will be back with this topic on June 11th. And with that, I will go ahead and adjourn. Have a good evening.